So if you see something that doesn't work, or where customers are working around, or you're asking yourself as you're driving home at night, like, why do we do it that way? Or you're saying to your girlfriend, boyfriend, significant other, you're never going to believe what they told me at work. So I think anytime you have a moment like that, that's an opportunity to raise something, which, maybe other people have seen it too. So
Yeah.
there's a wonderful term that Martin Lindstrom uses. He calls it the Ministry of Common Sense. And if you see something going on that the Ministry of Common Sense would not think was a good idea, maybe it's time to bring it to somebody's attention. The other thing I think
I
that's
love that.
valuable to think about is, what can you do that you don't need a whole lot of resources to do, but that might be a little experiment.
Hmm.
And I used the example earlier of my experience at the Department of Motor Vehicles, where they actually let me tell them by text when I was ready. I mean, this
That's
was
amazing.
amazing. It was an amazing experience, but didn't cost anything. And my guess, it came out of an experiment that some intern suggested and said, why don't you guys do it this way? Why do you have people sitting around unhappy waiting in your waiting room?
You had written this book in 2019, and so what would you have done differently, or how would you like republish it now, having gone through the pandemic and seeing how businesses had to pivot so quickly on digital transformation and everything else? So what was like a big takeaway from this pandemic that you would do differently on the book?
Well, actually, the paperback's coming out in September. So the paperback's coming out with a
There it
foreword
is then.
by me, with the experience of the pandemic behind us. And I think some things remain the same.
Yeah.
Our inability to see around corners, I think, remains the same. Where I think we've learned a big lesson is, I no longer have to make the case that times are uncertain, and I no longer have to make the case that things are highly likely to change. People have kind
Right.
of got that now. So where we're now struggling, where the next challenge is recognizing that the tools that we need are really the tools that come to us from high uncertainty situations, like innovation, or like
Hmm.
going off and doing exploratory work. And what people don't understand is they're very reliable tools. They're kind of like accounting tools, except in a different context. But you need to understand the difference. They're much less uncertain. Much more uncertain. They're much more about experimentation and discovery, much less about prediction and being right, much less about failure, much more about, oh, I learned something.
Right.
So it's a different discipline that you need to use, and it's a different set of incentives that you need to use. So I think our next big frontier is teaching organizations that the rules that we've inherited from a very predictable time are not going to be applicable in whatever's coming next. The biggest barrier to really understanding what is going to drive your customers and your constituencies' success is this maniacal focus on what we do, right? So if we're at university, we focus on the course. If I write a book, I focus on the book. And what I'm not really taking on board then is, what's the ultimate outcome? What's the job, as it were, to be done that my stakeholder has, that my customer has, that my constituent has? And so you need to get really beyond that here's what I do, and will you buy it and at what price? And and you need to really say, here's how I can help you achieve a solution. And maybe it has nothing to do at all with what I do, at least initially. Maybe it just has to do with something completely different. I think what we're seeing in strategy is a movement of value from products and service attributes. So, it's higher price, it's better tasting,
Right.
it's lower calorie, whatever it is, and towards a movement of value and interactions. So this is where your community
Ooh.
become important. So the fact that you have this network of hospitals,
Yeah.
and that you've got these networks of associates. Imagine getting a virtual cycle going, where the fact that you have these pet owners who are also hugely connected to lots of other things in their lives, right? And you've got this sort of interactions that you could create that could create value all along. So an archetypal example of this would be John Deere, right? They make tractors, but they don't actually make tractors. Yeah, sure, that's what they do. But tractors are really the vehicle for information. So they make information that's relevant to the farmers, the seed people, the soil people, the fertilizer people, the regulators,
Oh, yeah.
all those interactions add value all along the way. So think of yourself as more of an interaction company than a product service offering company. That could be very interesting for you.
That's amazing. That's amazing advice and an insight. I mean, when you think of it that way, in our case, the vehicle for delivery is seeing the pet and giving care, but it's something so much more. And when you can, I'm just imagining now putting myself in a hospital situation when I'm picking up my two crazy cats, Ashton and Kenji, who are going in next week, by the way. So I'm super excited for them to get some great care from our doctors here. But when I go in there and it's not just about that experience. It's also about what's happening to Ashton and Kenji and how this is impacting their lives, and that the joy that our teams have in taking care of them, but the connection that I have in terms of what I'm doing differently for Ashton and Kenji and the impact I'm making on them lives. It's about these interactions,
Right.
and it's ultimately about the impact, which ties back to company purpose, of course.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Love it. I love it. This is great.